1, 2, 3, 4.
Some, depth, nuance to the book, because later on you read kind of what I did, and you're like, oh, well, maybe he had that coming. But anyway, I didn't want things to be black and white, but just many, many shades of gray. So, but this last chapter 13 of that story, sets the stage for everything else that comes, and just kind of paints a big overview of what I was after when I was doing this. So, chapter 13, Introduction Epilogue. Quote by RuPaul, "It's important to find your tribe." I took a short ride around the internet looking at quotes about tribes. Some were sayings from actual first people on the importance of their cultural heritage. Some were definitions of what a tribe was, while others were warning about the dangers and pitfalls of tribalism in terms of race, gender, and the myriad of bigotry that can befall all people when they succumb to social exclusiveness. None of these was really addressed exactly what I was after when it came to describing my feelings towards this large 200 plus group of friends that I have come over the last 3 of this writing decades to call my tribe. The RuPaul quote touches on that feeling only in the most broad and vague terms that I can relate to. I'm sure with more searching, I could find the exact quote by some philosopher or famous actor that described the way I feel about my tribe, but honestly, I lost patience looking. So I'll save time and get us moving forward. I'll just say what I need to say in terms of what I think cover the way I feel, get this show on the road. This will not be succinct. First, I think it's important to know what lies ahead of you here and to fill in where I can in terms of timeline and chronology. This will not be a step-by-step biography of my life. These stories were always just that, stories. Poems, lessons, and parables of sorts that could serve as entertainment, memorial, or warning. They aren't fables, they're almost true tales. Sure, they've been embellished sometimes, combined together other times, and recalled inexpertly at best. Some are even purposely convoluted. Regardless, these are narratives of events that happened to and around me. Everything here is accurate. Dialogue, of course, is a guess at best, but I tried to capture the moments and verbiage I shared with those around me in a responsible, if not truthful way. These are my versions of events. Sometimes the names have been changed to, as Bon Scott from AC/DC once said, protect the guilty. Sometimes they're not. It's all rather cavalier and arbitrary. No last names are used. Well, mostly anyway. You think a character resembles you and you hate it, and you have the plausible deniability that I built in on your side. That's my gift to the tribe. If you want to claim a character here or deny that one with the same name as you, I will back you publicly. I will also not publicly identify anybody but me on these pages. Some names are unique, and I have some friends with the same name, John or Mike, for example. So writing stories with multiple people with the same name, familial or romantic ties between characters here will probably be a dead giveaway of someone's identity. You know the people I'm talking about, be content in that knowledge, but let's all keep it to ourselves. If you have no connection to the punk rock alternative art scene in Bloomington, Indiana, in the years I'm talking about, then none of this matters. In fact, you will probably enjoy it. I may have left people out of the telling of certain events. My apologies if you feel cheated. My friend Jennifer once wrote me after reading a story about our friend Robbie. Wasn't I there? I have the picture. She's right, of course. But in the end, everything here is about me. I am the character running through all of it, cannot be denied. Please keep that in mind. I'm not really writing your story. That is for you to do. If you were unlucky enough to be part of mine, quite possible you'll find yourself named in the page. Not everyone got a starring role, though. Doesn't mean you weren't important to me. I assure you, you are, especially you, Jennifer. I tried to be honest in as much as I could, considering this was all from my point of view. But when I was a jerk, I wrote myself as a jerk, even in third person. Most of the time, and I think this is accurate, I was just being me. I've been described as everything from a sweetheart to a gargoyle, and I copped to it all. Am, just a guy trying to learn how to be me. Sometimes I'm surly, sometimes I'm fun. Most times I'm moving in between the two. Been a constant process. And believe it when I say, I can appreciate that people could, still can, love me despite my warts. A lot happened in the 13 years, 1983 to 1996, that are represented here and in the book to follow. These stories will be a Cliff's Notes version of those events, a highlight reel. This is not an in-depth history. There was simply too much that went on for me to describe it in a way that would be dynamic enough to be considered an interesting. Things, events, and people were constantly happening, both in and around my sphere. So putting it all down would have required intense research and interviews. And in the end, I still wouldn't have gotten all, but I would have a encyclopedia many books long. No one has time for that. So consider this part, in particular, the filler you need to carry you through to the rest of the pages here. The Zero Boys show I saw that winter was the first of many punk rock shows I would attend. Music and the people around it attracted me like a moth to flame. I didn't care about much else, at least for the remainder of high school. I lived and breathed punk rock in its many forms. From the Avengers to the birthday party, I listened to and absorbed it all. The punk rock renaissance of the 1980s was vast in terms of what could be done with music. By the end of the decade, people would break it down and define what happened in many musical genres that kids would recognize today. Indeed, it started early with the term hardcore. But soon you had death rock, which became goth, straight edge, acid punk, garage, industrial, pop punk, grunge, thrash, emo, screamo, and so on and so forth. There's really too much to name and think about. But it all sprang out of that mid-1970s dissatisfaction with music that blossomed and then went underground just as quick. While underground in the 1980s, it grew like a mutant tuber, branching out and infecting the youth of the world, before finally bursting out and becoming a mainstream, profitable rock and roll institution. Funny to think about it now, but the bands who put out 1,000 copies of their 7-inch EP in 1980 and sold it for $3 can see that same record selling online for thousands of dollars. Major label distribution can get your records and CDs to more people now, but they aren't as desired as much as that living in the 80s 7-inch by the Zero Boys, or the first print of that Septic Death record. Green Day, as beloved as they are, will never demand as much money for their reprise records as the ones they did on Lookout early in their career. Even then, they'll never be desired as the original pressing of the Misfits record. There's always something about struggle and scarcity that makes a record valuable, at least in terms of money and quantity. Green Day may be a very popular band, but in my opinion, important as they are, they'll never be iconic. They weren't pioneers. They're driving their fucking tour bus on the highway we paved, Chris Doherty from the band Gangrene said in Paul Rockman's documentary, American Hardcore, in 2006. It's a documentary I highly recommend, along with Punk Attitude by Don Letts in 2005. And while I understand Chris's umbrage at these new punk-inspired bands, I don't share it. I'm not a musician. I'm a fan and connoisseur of rock music. So even though new bands are getting rich while making music similar to my beloved punk rock, it doesn't feel like they're stealing. It feels like the audience has come around is all. And in the end, that's a good thing. I think the kid who's listening to Joyce Manor or whatever punk type band you can think of will get curious enough to follow the lineage backward, ending up with the Stooges, the Velvet Underground, or the Electric Prunes. That sense of discovery was thrilling for me, and I bet it will be the same for them. Easier too. My generation made some quality shit, and we did it despite the naysayers and the cynics. We were trailblazers in terms of music, culture, and in some ways, both good and bad, attitude. We were like what author David Grann related from the Osage tribe, travelers in the mist. We were forging ahead in unknown territory. leading the way for those to follow, often making up the rules as we went along. The Muriel Strode quote at the end of this story applies to my tribe. Who we are and what we did is encapsulated in that quote. It was happening all across the nation in that time period. Punk rock was dangerous, provocative, and thrilling, even from our little corner of Bloomington, Indiana. Walking around in the 1980s with green hair and a pierced nose was truly a rebellious and dangerous act. Now the kid checking you out at Target has tattoos, a pierced lip, and a rainbow mohawk, has no idea what we went through so he could express himself so openly. Funny thing is, he may not even listen to punk rock, much less rock and roll. Sometimes that smarts, the lack of acknowledgement. But I'm sure all trailblazers feel that way at some point. Mostly, I feel proud. We were generation 1.1. We were Windows 95. We were the cordless phone, the launching pad built by us. You subcultures were not unique. You know, we had hippies and beat poets in Bloomington, and while they were beaten and spit on, in one famous case, firebombed, most of them had gone on to become upright citizens in the 1970s. They were business people, teachers, lawyers, and doctors, even if they still smoked pot every once in a while. They stepped back into the system and disappeared. Only the shadows of their music polluted our golden oldie radio station. Their revolution didn't prevent Ronald Reagan, although an argument can be made that we didn't prevent anything either. But we wanted to be different, not the same old save the world subculture. We wanted to leave a scar. The normal citizenry of Indiana adjusted to the hippies over the course of a decade and breathed a collective sigh of relief that society had not crumbled because of them. Their uppity music, the 70s and even the first years of the 1980s were pretty humdrum in Indiana. That sigh became a gasp, however, when the first of us walked down Kirkwood Avenue with our blue hair and our spiky leather jackets. It wasn't a chill form of rebellion at all. We scared people. By the mid-1980s, there was a pronounced and aggressive reaction to what we were doing. And don't get me wrong, there were punk rockers roaming around Bloomington 4 to 5 years before I even got there. But they were an invisible force of kids taking the steps the rest of us needed to blaze those trails a short while later. They listened to the Sex Pistols and the Ramones, and were generally considered weirdos by the other kids. They were unpopular and seen as pretty non-threatening, easily dismissed by their peers. Lucky for us, they drew an outline that later Bloomington punk rockers would appropriate, build on. In the years following, their bands, the Gizmos, the Dancing Cigarettes, and the Panics would be our inspiration, our hometown heroes. This day, they command mad respect and no small amount of adoration. During my last years of high school, punk rock moved forward in leaps and bounds. Our cadre started to grow exponentially as more kids filtered into our music scene. We attracted the outsiders, nerds, rabble-rousers, every manner of square peg into our group. The disaffected, alienated, angry joined with artists, musicians, and bohemians to shape our community like no other place in the Midwest. There wasn't a rigid demand for conformity or uniform that some punk rock communities demanded. It was fluid and alive. This was probably due in large part to the university. Kids started coming in from different parts of the country, and they brought with them their music, their culture, and their political sensibilities, which fed our tribe that much more. We visited nearby towns and cities that also had music scenes similar to our own. West Lafayette, Indianapolis, Muncie, Vincennes, where we recruited more people into our federation. Many of them moved to Bloomington and brought their own taste and experience to our bohemian biome, quickly becoming part and parcel of our tribe. A friend of mine once said, "I'd cross a busy street in oncoming traffic to meet another punk rocker. Everyone worthy, and I mean in terms of probity, were welcomed with open arms. You had a skewed point of view. We were interested in what you had to say. Different was good. Thinking outside the box was revered. Crushing the box was cherished." This is a time period in which the following stories take place. The life of our tribe rolled on amongst the din of the 1980s. Reaganomics, MTV, nukes, the AIDS epidemic, New Wave, the drug war, Chernobyl, Live Aid, the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger. The rise of rap music, the fall of the Berlin Wall, Iran-Contra, crack cocaine, and evangelical politics. In the middle of it all, we forged ahead with the music and culture we had created for ourselves. Our tribe swelled and waned as people came in and out. Punk rock also evolved, as I touched on earlier. Eventually, some people would start referring to it as alternative music, and the modes and methods of its delivery would bounce back and forth along with us until the end of the decade. Old favorites like heavy metal and funk would marry themselves to punk rock, and interesting hybrids would pop up. Later, rap music would do the same. Through it all, though, despite disagreements over form and function, my tribe prospered and matured. We experienced life in Bloomington like one great extended family, living and loving together as we took aim at the future. Then we slowly broke apart. Each kindred soul took their first steps through the doors of adulthood, walked away from home. Some stayed, myself, for instance. We all keep in touch. But that communal aspect we all shared from the 1980s up through the mid to late 1990s was never to be visited again, except, of course, through our reminiscence. I look back now with a mixture of nostalgia and awe. My tribe, indeed the whole generation of kids, that took music and culture by the horns and reshaped what was possible, fill me with pride. For sure, there were the leaders and movers who did most of the heavy lifting, but to be part of that generation that pushed them forward, added our voice to theirs, was a phenomenal, providential occurrence. The millions of kids who didn't participate missed out. While they were feathering their hair and steering with indifference at our garish antics, we reshaped the world. I hope you enjoy these stories, infinitesimal as they may seem, my journey with the cream of the crop, Generation X. I expect, like an interesting street vendor, they'll introduce you to flavors and experiences you didn't know previously. Not that, maybe they'll just give you a chuckle or draw a tear from your eye. Perhaps they'll provide a lesson or a deterrent, or in a worst case scenario, inspiration. After all, some of the best stories start with a bad decision. Regardless, please turn the page and read on. Consequences began. And then the Muriel Strode quote from a 1902 periodical, it was entitled Wind Wafted Flowers. I will not follow where the path may lead, but I will go where there is no path, and I will leave a trail. That's it.
That was
There we
terrific.
go. Thanks, Kevin.
Awesome.
All right, so now it's us. I actually did make like a list of like 5 or 6 questions or whatever, kind of like an author interview kind of thing, and we'll begin with that. But I guess I want to preface this a little bit by saying that Kevin asked me to write the introduction to the 2nd volume, and I think originally he was going to publish it. What about now? Something like that. But with the quarantine because of the coronavirus, he got antsy in May and started bugging me. Are you done yet? Did you get it done? Did you get it done? And so I like just totally ignored him. I didn't respond at all. And of course, he was like, come on, man, did you get it done? Did you get it done? And so then I sent him the completed piece, of course, like 5 or 6 days after he started bugging me for it. And I kind of got a kick out of that. So Kevin actually started sending me, I don't know, I think complete initial drafts of some of these stories. I wrote about this a little bit in the introduction, but I had thought that he had started sending them to me after we were all on Musical Family Tree, because John had a blog and I was like sharing stuff from my blog on the site and stuff, and Kevin started writing, I think, the Rocket stuff at MFT. But when I went back and actually looked at my email correspondence with Kevin, I realized that he had started sending me stuff pretty early on, like around 2002, I think is when he first sent me a story. And so that was what I actually wanted to start with. You told me that you first started writing because you took a class, I think. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's a little more complicated than that, and I touch on it in the last part of the 2nd book. It really just started with reminiscences. I mean, I had a group of kids that worked for me at this place back here, and I would, tell them these stories as they were making their own stories. And then I got clean in 1991. So I would tell some of these stories to NA groups because fuck, they're funny. And one thing that addicts trying to defeat their alcoholism or drug addiction need more of in their life is a little humor, because they're not getting a lot of that. What's going on. So I was doing that. I was already kind of verbally doing this. And then I left Rockets. I was in a big empty building and I was away from everybody. I kind of, because Rockets was gone, the few people I had kept in contact with, wasn't more. So my wife was working at General Electric and we would carpool. So I'd have to go to General Electric, wait for her to get out. And as I sat there, I was like, I got to write that Robbie story. That's just hilarious. I had told that story to a guy named Hal that some of you may know. And Hal was like, oh man, I want to write that down. I was like, sure, Hal, go ahead, do whatever you want. And so I started writing it down while I was waiting on my wife on little scraps of paper. And then I got this job where they wanted to teach me how to do HVAC stuff. So they sent me to Ivy Tech. And I took a writing course that required. And so I wrote that whole Robbie story out as one of the stories from my writing course. And that was probably the first story I sent to you, Mike, that Robbie story.
The Fabulous Accident, is that it? The sixth one in the first book? Yeah. And that's the last piece in the first book.
Yeah.
So, like, what year do you think that was? When did you leave Rockets?
I left Rockets in 96.
So you started writing before 9/11 probably then?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was. Because I also sent them to Theron Thomas when he was overseas in the Guard.
Oh, I didn't know you did that.
So Theron had
that
Robbie story. Yeah, he had that Robbie story.
I bet he shared that with Mike too, because Mike was over there with him.
Might have.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. So before 9/11, I didn't realize that, because for a long time I thought that it started around when NFT started, which was like 04 or 05.
So it might have been just after 9/11, if I'm thinking about it. Or just after George W. Bush was elected.
Right, yeah, traumatic times, right? Right now,
right
now, a lot of people all over the country are starting to write shit down. Exactly the same thing. Let's see. Writing class. Oh yeah. So the other thing I wanted to just bring up in conversation, since you and I are here together and we have a group of friends, there's a story in the second book called Susabel, which is a story about Kevin's relationship with my sister right around the time that she died. And Kevin had worked, that might have been, I don't know, was that you started working on that pretty early on, like maybe right after the Robbie thing?
That was right after the Robbie. That was the second story I did for that class. And I think now that story is like 100 pages long, but when I first wrote it,
add more to it.
Yeah, when I first wrote it for the class, it was, I think, 10 pages, because that was the limit they wanted for the class. So,
and Kate Matthew started like bugging me. I can't remember if she was calling me or if she was like texting me or whatever. She was like, Mike, Kevin's really nervous about sharing a thing with you. He's really afraid you're not going to like it. And I was like, what? And so she's like, well, it's because, well, I'm like, she kind of like she felt like she couldn't completely explain what the story was going to be about. And then finally, I finally kind of browbeat her into telling me a little bit more about it. And I just was like, well, what the fuck? Of course I want to read that. And so then you sent it to me, but I remember you were really like, kind of concerned about it. And of course it's wonderful. And it's a new, extremely, lovingly detailed holographic fragment of your experience of, my sister's life and death. And, I was able to share it with my parents. And of course, they're incredibly grateful for your taking the time to write it as well. So, I mean, I know I've expressed thoughts like this to you in the past in various ways, but I wanted to take the time to mention that now. Go ahead.
Here's the thing with the story. I shared it initially, with a class full of strangers, so that was easy. And then I shared it with the people who were around me at the moment when that when that happened, when, you know, we were involved at the stud barn. It was a stud barn 1 that I actually lived with you. So it was amazing to me that you never caught on, but
Oh no, we lived in separate places that year because I had already moved. So it was
did you?
you were in Stud Barn 2, yeah.
Okay.
Because
Well,
I
I
was
mean,
only in Stud Barn 1 for that one summer. Oh wait, you guys stayed in the house. I
yeah.
moved to another place. I moved in with Dave and Laird.
Is that what happened to it? I mean, I took over Laird's room, I remember. Stud Barn 1. You were
Right.
there for a short time.
I
But
was there for that summer. God, that was a hot fucking summer. And then I
yeah.
moved in with Bill Zink and Vid from the Waffles. I can't remember who else was in that house. Over by Bryant Park. And
So,
that was where I lived.
so Kate Matthews and Danielle used to just bust my balls. Was that Susie's bike I saw out front? And, you know, just, you know, a lot of teasing back then. So they were all kind of in on what was going on. And it was just kind of a quiet, you know, thing we had. And I didn't share it. And then after she died, I just thought it was in poor taste to even bring it up. So the story was my way of um, resolving a lot of unresolved grief, if that makes sense. It was something that had been bubbling in me for a long time, and I really needed to get it out. And getting it on paper did that. So beyond that class in Ivy Tech, I hadn't really meant to share it with anyone, but then I thought, you know, I ought to send this to Kate, see what she thinks. And I think she got probably 4 or 5 different versions of it. And Danielle got a couple different versions of it, but and then John Matthews, of course. So people that were around.
I did actually get a few different versions of it too, but over probably not the entire span of time that they got their versions. So something that's kind of interesting here that I don't think I'd really put together. It sounds to me like that
Lost you.
9/11 after 9/11.
I'm losing you.
You glitched, Mike.
Oh, sorry, my bandwidth seems. Am I back now? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Better.
Better.
Okay. All right. So was that writing class like maybe a year after 9/11, maybe something like that?
Yeah, somewhere around there. Maybe.
Well, that's fucking weird, dude. Because I wrote my own version of Susie's death as well, and I actually wrote it on the first roughly around well, she died on her accident was on 9/11, and she died on 9/18, which was my dad's birthday. And so the first year after 9/11, I had a job as an online journalist writing for an entertainment magazine, and so I was writing like all the time, just like grinding it out. I must have been doing 5,000 words a day, and so in order to sort of keep that engine going, I would write a story, and then I would write a piece or a couple paragraphs or whatever of this memoir of my sister's death, because I wanted to capture what I remember, because it had only been 12 years, like it was for you as well. And I remember just really intensely feeling the experience of composing it. And Zender, who I don't have, oh, there you are, and will remember reading those posts as they went up that year. It was a very intense week for me posting those posts. And so it's so interesting to me to learn that you were essentially writing your version of those events, like basically at the same time.
Pretty
That's
close.
something I don't think I knew until today. That's really interesting.
Yeah, pretty close.
So that Susabel, that story is the third story in the second book. Let's see. And yeah, so actually I've got a couple of things. One more thing that's really about writing, and then uh, uh, then I'm going to tease you about your antics on Facebook briefly. But but no, so the writing thing. Can you talk about your writing process a little bit? Because when we were working together, or when I like butted in and was like, Kevin, you're doing this story. Oh my God, I've got to give you production tips because you're going to lose your mind trying to get this book put together. And so I started, giving you feedback and things like that, and tried to stay out of your way, not to do editing really or anything. Although, I mean, I did point out typos and stuff here and there, but I really didn't edit your book. I was interested in your process because I was like, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard of. And I thought it might be interesting for you to share that with people here in terms of how you wrote it and how you put the book together.
I wrote a lot of them in bits and starts, and then I would go back to them and rewrite, polish them up. Like I said in that little snippet I wrote, a lot of this is from my memory, which is imperfect. So when my memory was imperfect, I mean, due to drugs and alcohol and crazy antics I got up to, I filled in what I thought made sense, or who I thought might have been there, or some way to keep the story move along. It was important that I looked at it from a reader's perspective, and that it was a story being told that made sense and didn't jump around. And each one of them, I tried to do that best I could, considering there's a lot of events and people that other people may have not have known. There came a time about when my kids were probably from 8 to 12, somewhere around there, where I didn't get to write because I was just busy doing kid stuff, taking them to school, taking care of them, taking them out, keeping them busy, all that stuff. So I could never find time to sit down at home. My home was really loud. If you have two small children, your home gets really loud. So I kept revisiting this story that I had started, called Nominal Epiphenomenal, which I think is also in the first book, about me losing my bicycle. And I just couldn't sit down and do it. So New Year's Eve came around, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to make a resolution. I never make resolutions because I always disappoint myself, right? So I was like, you know what? I'm going to sit down every day, and if I just write one sentence, that's my goal. I'll just write one sentence. So every day I would sit down, open up the story or whatever I was working on, and write until the loudness happened, or it was time for breakfast, or it was time for school, or it was time for work. And I made a lot of progress doing it that way. Just writing a sentence down, or writing two sentences down, sometimes getting a page out, and then I would revisit that the next day and see what looked good and what didn't look good and what made sense. And so the end product, a lot of, I have to credit you with cluing me into the word swarthy. Do you remember this?
I do. I'll let you tell the story, though. That was the single most important vocabulary suggestion that I made. Yes.
That was because I had the idea that this word swarthy, I had only ever heard it used in pirate movies, right? So I had this fellow I worked with that many of you may remember, named Mel. He was a heavy metal guy, was a guitar player for this band called Toxin. And throughout these stories, I would describe Mel as swarthy. And then Mike's like, swarthy is a skin color. And Mel was the palest, most sickly looking person you could ever meet. The swarthy really didn't work.
Well, and you were using it as like a description of character.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
You could just tell that guy was swarthy from the way he looked at you.
Swarthy.
And I was like, oh man, I promised myself I wasn't going to get involved in Kevin's word choices as I read through this book. But there's no way that I can let him, go to press without letting him know that the conventional meaning of the word is dark skin.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I did. And I could hear you blush over the phone, dude. I could hear you blush.
Yeah, I mean, I went and looked it up, and I was like, wow, why didn't I ever bother to go to a dictionary and look up this word? It's because I heard it used so many times.
That's not your writing process, man.
No, it's not. Although I do throw in some 10-cent words every now and then.
Oh, yes, it's true, you do.
But yeah, so that was very welcome editing.
Well, the other thing was that, so when I started interfacing with Kevin about the technical aspects of this stuff, I had expected that he had, been doing the actual composition of the stories and like revising them and working on them in, like a word processor, like Word or in Google Docs or something. But he actually did the entire thing, including the actual layout of the book itself, in WordPad, which is the generic word processor that
Yeah.
comes with any Windows system.
Oh yeah.
And so when I heard that, I'm somebody who's worked in book production and print design and stuff, and I was just like, what? I mean, I literally couldn't believe it. It's like it's as though Kevin had recorded a multi-track album using 2 single-track cassette recorders, bouncing them back and forth. I was like, what in God's name is your deal? Because it's like, it would have made for a lot of work, but it's the system that he had set up and it was using for 25 years. And so I was like, well, okay, dude, go to town.
Yeah. No.
And
No
he
word
got it
correct
done.
or anything.
Just nuts.
Just
But
typed it
yeah,
out.
you gotta respect your stubbornness, man, your stick-to-itiveness. And so actually that's a good transition to me teasing you about Facebook stuff. So
Oh.
when we were when I last saw you in person in Bloomington, when I was there for 3 days in 2016 because my uncle died. And I saw you more than I saw anybody else. I think I saw you every single day that I was in town. And we had, I don't know, 3-hour-plus conversations, maybe more than that over that period of time. And it was really great. I really enjoyed those conversations. And during that period of time, you talked to me about how you had evolved your strategy of a month on Facebook and then a month off. And you said a really interesting thing to me during that that's just always stuck with me. You were like, well, I would just, I'm paraphrasing, I'm not going to be able to quote you directly, but you said something along the lines of, I would just get so like mad and like enraged about, someone having saying something that was wrong or stating a belief that was, in some way oppressive or inappropriate, that I would just start hammering them on Facebook. I would just get so mad. And, I would get so mad, and then I would realize that I was like so angry at these people. And this is the quote that I remember: these people that I love. Like you said, that was a super intensity. You were like, and I don't want to do that. And so that was the thing that you told me that led you to start taking a month off Facebook, is so that you would not be super aggro toward dear friends, right? And that was really interesting. And I think you've kept that up for, I don't know, like 4 or 5 years now, for quite some time.
Since 2016, since the election of 2016.
4 years, yeah.
That was the pinnacle of me misbehaving on Facebook. Not that I've stopped. Not that I've stopped. I still do it. But that
Not
was the
intentionally.
pinnacle of people going,
White
"I've
people
had it
are
with
an
this
invasive
motherfucker."
species.
Yeah.
White
Yeah.
people are an invasive species. Got you in jail, right?
I got
What
me
the
in
hell?
jail. Yeah. On John Early's page. So, and I still do it. I still go off on things, and it's, Facebook is a rage machine, but how else am I going to keep track of all my friends and where they're at in the world?
Right,
So
exactly.
there's this thing about it that is just, it just stokes my rage. And it's not always, what John Strom is saying. It could be something else in the feed. And then I see something John Strom and I'll key into it. Go, fuck you, John. And it's just, so
well, look,
every other month I take off, and it's
you said my name, so I'm butting into the conversation here.
Yeah.
I got to say, from my perspective, since I don't really mix up on Facebook, I might have in some formative years and found it to be very, very non-productive efforts. But your Facebook profile was during your sort of peak years of engagement was really fucking hilarious. It was really fun to be a sort of a passive viewer for. So, us sitting back, we're like, that's great stuff. And by the way, that's such terrific writing, Kevin. Your piece was so, amazingly stated. I think I can speak for everyone here as part of that scene that, to kind of think of our scene, our little world elevated like that is always really exciting, because it certainly felt that way at the time. But should we open up the questions here? Should we bring some other folks in?
Yeah, I think we're good. I got my list done, and that was the last little thing I wanted to. Yeah, I wanted to share that moment of heartfelt emotion that you shared with me with a wider audience, because I thought it was pretty important, actually. It was a moment of self-knowledge on your part, sir. And,
yeah, I have many of those. I just don't share them.
Well,
except with Sonia.
Whoever wants to ask a question or make a comment or jump into this conversation, just unmute and sort of raise your hand, and we'll bring you in. Harry is ready to go.
Yeah, Kevin, I just want to second what John was saying. Your Facebook hosts, I always miss it when they're not there, and I really love your writing. Great stuff.
Thanks, Harry.
Anybody else?
I'll kick off the question.
Chris.
Chris has something.
One thing I wanted to say, my kids have gotten to an age where, like my oldest, or my twins are 6 years old, and so I've become that embarrassment now in their life, which is pretty funny because I remember that when I was a kid. But one thing about these books that I'm really looking forward to is giving them a chance to read these when they're older, because I don't think there's any real way that me telling them something, they're not going to believe anything about how their dad used to be, when I was growing up. But this is a way for them to read it from a different perspective and get kind of a general idea about what their dad was like when he was younger. So thanks.
Right on.
Something I'd like to add, that writing these should be the first of many books. All you motherfuckers should be doing this. Some of you have much better stories than I have. I mean, and you were at different parts and different places at the same time doing similar things that were just as important. And the Midwest is really, really underrepresented in all of the punk rock reminiscences going on. Seeing tons of it from New York, you're seeing tons of it from LA, but Indiana. But we had stuff going on. We did have things going on.
Hey, Kevin, I want to build on that for a second, because so you tell one story that I turn up a couple times in the book, and it's always, you're associating me with the bands I was in, so it's always obvious. And I had the great honor of introducing you to Mike Watt, which is great in the book. But there's one situation where you're sort of describing some kind of internal drama, and it's when the Lemonheads played Second Story, and I'd gotten a review in the paper that was sort of presented me in a light where it seemed like I was kind of ripping on the local scene and people were mad about it. But I was like, how does he know about this? And then I remembered that you were posting stuff in Musical Family Tree at the same time I was, So right. I sort of, it was right after the economic crash. It was in 2009, because all of a sudden I'd been, working 100 hours a week, and all of a sudden I had no work to do. So I started writing memoir stuff and posting it on there. But it seemed like we were doing that at the same time. So did you get that from my thing?
Yeah, and I think I make reference, because a lot of people talked about it, that I knew nothing about it. I just went to the show and had a good time.
Yeah, this is like the best show at Second Story ever. I mean, probably, that fucking Pitbull set is unbelievable.
Well, so everyone else can hear it. I'll tell it from my point of view, then you can read Kevin's account. But I was out on the second summer tour with the Lemonheads, and we weren't a big band at the time, but we were playing places like Second Story and drawing crowds, And I had an interview with Mike Leonard from the Herald. Was it the Herald Telephone at that point? And yeah, it was something like, I had to leave Bloomington because I really wanted to make it in music, man, and I knew that the scene there wasn't ambitious enough to really contain what I was trying to do. Jackassy douchebag stuff. I'm 20 years old. So anyway, of course, all my friends read it because it's in the paper. You remember how important something was. It was a paragraph in the Herald Times back then. So, so everybody reads it, and I show up at the sound check, and nobody will talk to me. It's like my good buddies like Glenn Hicks and Kent Berglund, and I don't know, Kevin Loyal, all these people that I know really well are just like kind of shaking their head and walking away from me, By the end of the night, that was past, but those bands just wanted to humiliate us on stage. That was what they were trying. They wanted to humiliate me on stage. They're like, we're not letting them have this one. So they were playing like it was the last show they played in their life.
Well, it was supposed to be the Pitbull's farewell show. It was supposed to be their last show. But I mean, I think your set has to be taped too, although I've never heard it. I mean, both the Ruin set and the Pitbull set are on Musical Family Tree. And that Pitbull set, I mean, I remember watching that show that night and thinking, this is one of the most amazing rock and roll things I have ever seen. It blew my mind. And you can actually go to the tape and that perception is completely correct. It's an amazing set. So I would actually like to hear your set from that night some night.
Well,
Anyway.
I think it was a good set because we had to, we had to show up for that. But also Kevin got up on stage and sang Louie Louie. And here's one thing I want to say about this, Kevin. It's the last thing I'll say, then I'll turn the floor over to people that I'm sure have questions. But you had a nickname in the Lemonheads, and Evan Dando used to talk about you all the time. And your nickname,
Really?
and you'll understand this, was Fuck So Now.
Fuck So Now. Yes, I remember
The
that.
Fuck So Now house. Yeah.
So we'd be going to Bloomington, and Evan would be like, "Are we going to see Fuck So Now?" He didn't call him Kevin or Bert or whatever. So that was something that, because I knew this guy who was an art. You might not know this, Kevin, but there's an art professor named Ronald Markman who's since passed away. Who used to do these amazing, sort of elevated comic strips. That was his medium, and he had all these different fake brand names, and he had a sort of fake city with signs all over it that said "Fuck So Now." It was like an advertisement, So I don't know how it happened. I wrote it on my jacket or something, but you started saying it.
Oh yeah, I thought it was hilarious.
And
So,
you come up to me and just
it's like saying a cuss word in high school, but not saying a cuss word. So it was just,
You would
I
say
said
that
it all over.
in the hall. You'd come up, we're walking, we got our books, rather than, shaking hands or whatever, you just come and go, "Fuck So Now."
Well, and I should clarify the word that John's referring to is actually spelled Fuxo.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so it's like a joke, right? Anyway, yeah, Markman's art's great.
You were known and well known as Fuck So Now, so I thought you'd appreciate it for years.
Well, one remark about that set that night was, and I think I made it in the book, the Pitbulls on Crack doing a Led Zeppelin medley to start off their set.
Yeah,
was just fucking amazing. It just blew me away. And looking back on it, I might have made the connections that maybe that was a little poke at the Lemonheads going, "Hey, rock stars, look what we can do," kind of thing. So
bring it on, man. That's
I don't know if it was or not, but
felt those emotions, two bands of middle-aged guys getting on stage, just like trying to blow each other off the stage, just doesn't happen.
yeah.
that's right. Yeah, I had the pleasure. Greg Phillips has come out and stayed with me a couple of times over the years. And the first time he came out and stayed with us for, I don't know, a week and a half or something, he's going camping. He actually lived in Seattle for a while. So I actually had the pleasure of playing that tape for him for the first time. He had never heard it before. And so I was just like, "Greg, let's smoke out. You sit down, have a beer." And I was like, "This is a performance by Pitbulls on Crack from 1988. And I just turned it up and let it go. And his eyes like popped out of his head because he was hearing the parts that he was playing, and the stuff that he's doing is fucking incredible. I mean, Greg doesn't really think of himself as a gifted guitarist, and he's certainly not a motivated musician.
He's got a good right hand, man. He has got a good right
But goddamn, can he play when he hits it, man. Unbelievable. Anyway, so that was a moment of great pleasure to me to watch him like reevaluate his skill set. It was unbelievable. Anyways, okay, questions.
Pitbulls were all great, including Al, who's watching in.
Oh, that's right, Al.
Hey, hello. Good to
The
see
pounded-
you all.
Yeah.
Glenn sends his regards. So Glenn cannot make it, but he sends his regards. Oh, good to see everybody.
Likewise, man. All right. Anybody else? Oh, Christy. Unmute. There you go.
So this is funny. So Bird, I was trying to do what I always do as a librarian, which is to read the book really quickly the night before book club, or go back and review parts of it. And so shut up. And so anyway, last night I was reading the bits about listening to Jelly Beans and All Quiet on the Western Front for the first time. And I think, I've read a lot of descriptions of people talking about when they first heard music, when they first heard the Sex Pistols or they first heard certain bands off of those compilations. And I just want to say that you do a better job with the visceral feelings, the emotional feelings of that than I think I've read elsewhere. And I just really, I want to say that's hard to pull off, because I think it's something that all of us experience when we've heard this raw music for the first time, how just mind-blowing it is for us. But you capture that so well. you captured it so well that I couldn't sleep for hours. I was like really hyped up and wanted to go run around the yard. But anyway.
Thanks, Christy. When I heard that, I was in jail of sorts. You know, my folks had me, and this happened all through middle school, all through high school, bad grades, whatever.
I was also often in jail. Oftentimes thanks to Wybark, but anyway.
So when I got arrested at 16, it wasn't just waiting till the next report card came out. It was like indefinite as far as I knew. I mean, my dad was like, "You're never coming out. You'll never be free again." That was the way it was going to be. So to discover this music, you know, and after a while, you know, it's probably not relayed really well in the first story, but you know, that arrest happened in the spring, right after we got out of school, and all summer I was in my room. You know, stereo was pulled out, the TV was pulled out. I had books. That's what I read for the longest time. And then very gradually, my mother would work on my father to get me more little privileges, like, you know, let him play his stereo if he puts his headphones on and shit like that. So by the time, and you know, and of course, you can't go hang around with your friends anymore. You can't hang out with these people you got arrested. Interesting side note, the guy I got arrested with died last night. So
Oh yeah, I'm glad you
throw that
mentioned
out
that,
there.
actually.
Yeah. He died of lung cancer, but
Why don't you talk about him a little bit, because you mentioned it on Facebook, and I know he's
Yeah.
an important friend of yours.
Well,
I meant to
now
mention
he's
that
dead.
earlier. I apologize.
So he's probably not going to be upset that I give away his identity, but his name was Billy Sylvester. He was a bad kid. I mean, all through school, he got in trouble all the time. He has no filter. I mean, this was before people knew what ADHD was, you know, and this was a kid who also experienced a lot of trauma. I mean, worse than any trauma that I experienced. You know, the abuse that he got was pretty harsh. And, you know, he was just kind of this guy that I lived vicariously through, because he would say shit that you wouldn't believe was coming out of his mouth about a teacher or somebody or a cop or the school bully. He had no filter. He would, whatever he thought came out of his mouth, no matter how heinous, no matter what kind of ass kicking it was going to give him. It would just boom. And then, you know, he got the shit beat out of him at home. So he learned to fight, and through him, I learned to fight. You know, I was picked on through first parts of middle school. And so this guy, you know, he was on I say that he's a closest thing to a miracle that I know. And that's mainly because his early life was so bad. He was the typical guy that was going to go to jail and spend the rest of his life in and out of prison. And then he found the Marines and they straightened him out, you know. And I went the opposite way. I went complete opposite, you know, punk rock straightened me out, you could say. But that wouldn't have worked for Bill. But anyway, my parents were like, "You're not going to be hanging out with him anymore. You're not going to be hanging out with any of those kids." So I had to find new friends. That's, you know, where I started talking to Tom Barr, and I'll mention Tom's name. I don't think I say anything bad about it.
You're breaking the rules.
I am breaking the rules. It just slipped out.
No, he said he was happy with it on Facebook. So go.
Was he? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he introduced me to this music, and listening to those records was in his house, in his little cramped room over on Smith Avenue. Dark little room, and I had like an hour to do it before my mom came and got me. And in that hour, you know, you have epiphanies throughout your life. And that was the first of a few that I would have. Was discovering this brand new, to me, brand new music that spoke to me and spoke to my teenage angst in such a way that I couldn't escape. I just couldn't.